He wrote this book called The Accidental Prime Minister, which many of you might have also read. I was just wondering, did you write it? The books came out around the same time. Did you write it as a kind of riposte to Sanjay Baru's book?
Well, I started writing my book in 2009. It was, in fact, before my father became Prime Minister for his second term. So I had already started, and I assume Sanjay had also started around then. I don't know. I worked on my book for 5 years. I don't know how long he worked on it. He brought out his book just before the elections. It was my deliberate intention to bring out my book after the elections because, I did not want to use my father's position to promote my book. If he was prime minister and my book came out, then it is sort of labeled as the prime minister's daughter's book. And I thought that would be a very sort of unethical thing to do. I wanted to release my book uh, without that label. I wanted to release that book as a book written by a daughter, not as a daughter of a prime minister or ex-prime minister. So I deliberately released my book after the elections. My book was actually ready a year earlier. And my publisher said, why don't we bring it out now? Because then the sales will, obviously be much better. But I said, I don't care. I'm quite happy with whatever sales I get in the end. I don't need to sort of push it out to, you know, somehow get more sales. So no, I did not write my book as a response to Sanjay's book at all.
Maybe if you had written it, it had come out at the time you thought it might have. It could have been called Prime Time. Um, there was a lot of controversy about Sanjay Baru's book. And of course, people must have picked it up to find out all the wrong things about Manmohan Singh. But I was also reading that book parallelly with your book. And I just found something very interesting, which I thought, again, I'd like to share. There are portions in Sanjay Baru's book where he has actually heaped a lot of praise on your father, which is what I liked. It's lovely to pick out the positive parts. And there's a chapter in his book which talks about Manmohan's Camelot, where he talks about how many key individuals from Eric Hobsbawm to George Soros flocked to meet this thinking man's political leader. No other Congress leader, and I quote him, in his opinion, could match Dr. Singh's combination of personal integrity, administrative experience, international stature, and political appeal across a wide swath of public opinion. I think that says quite a lot about, in fact, there's lots more praise, but I just thought I'd bring out this little point where there are actually positives about him.
That is a very nice thing to say. But honestly, I have not read Sanjay Baru's book. So I have no idea what all he has written. Personally,
You were not hiding from it, were you?
No, I'm not hiding from a book. I mean, what I prefer to do is, I prefer to read a book written by an insider, an expert. And honestly, I never considered Sanjay to be an expert on my father. I mean, after all, he was just a media advisor. He essentially advised the media, not the prime minister. So Sanjay had he was not at all involved in any policy making. He was not at all involved in any decision making. So I honestly don't see how he could have got to know my father as an individual, as a prime minister. particularly well. So it wasn't really worth my while, reading the book. If somebody who actually knew him had written the book, if somebody who actually knew how the government works, how the Prime Minister's office works, somebody like that had written the book, I would have loved to read it. Because, my father doesn't tell his family anything about what goes on in his office. So we are always dying to know, we're always sort of questioning him and trying to poke him and prod him and get something out of him. He never tells us anything. So if there was a book which actually explained, I would love to have read it. But I'm afraid this is not that book.
Since you had to poke and prod your father to get things out of him when you were actually writing the book, you did somehow get through his reticence quite a bit to talk about a number of issues. And there are many issues, for instance, I find that he does open up on, and where he defends his thinking on a lot of issues very, very positively. He comes out and says, from what you have quoted, that I did the right thing in so many ways. When you were talking about the controls that hurt the economy, or his views on bank nationalization, he was very positive on that. His feeling that after 1971 and after the Congress party won the elections, when he said that there should be a shift in economic policy towards greater import liberalization, a greater trade liberalization. Um, Also, um, he told you that when inflation was well over 23% in 73 and peaked to over 34% in 74, an anti-inflation package designed by the finance ministry worked. It was Dr. Singh who was then the CEA, the chief economic advisor, and he was one of the youngest, by the way, who said that the government could deliver then because the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, was able to take risks. And it's later, in a coalition government era, that inflation management would be far more difficult. All this you managed to cull out of him.
Well, my father is essentially an economist, and um, after he did his PhD from Oxford, he had already taught before that. He started teaching before that, but he continued to teach for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And then he worked in the UN for a while, and then he basically became a civil servant, and he worked first in the Ministry of Commerce and then in the Ministry of Finance. So economics has dominated his life. The sad thing is that economics has not dominated my life at all. I have a very poor understanding of economics. And so when I was working on the book, I realized that if I wanted to talk to him, there is no way that I could escape talking about economic issues. So I was really, really nervous, and I had to actually prepare myself very thoroughly. I mean, it was like studying for an exam. So every time I had to speak to him, I would sort of fix an appointment and then sort of cram as much as I could before that, because I didn't dare ask him a question which, he might sort of think, oh my God, what a stupid question to ask. So I had to work really, really hard to understand the basics. I mean, nothing advanced. But I think in the process, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about India's economic uh, issues, about policies, about management from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So it was an education for me. And also, I feel that, I don't know if anybody would agree, economics is there's a lot of jargon, and it's very technical. And if you haven't studied it, you sort of get pushed out. It's hard to tap into that whole field. And I know a lot of people who would like to know what goes on in the economy, but it just seems too hard to find out. And so I really took it upon myself to try and simplify some of those ideas, some of that knowledge, some of that experience. So this book is not meant for economists, definitely not. It's meant for the non-economists, for people who would like to know more about, what were the issues, what were the questions, what was tried, what worked, what did not work. So it's really meant for those sort of people. I hope there are many such people in the audience.
Thank you, because that's what I wondered, how you got to the core of it. You did have to do a lot of homework. We realize you did, but that's how you had to question your father before you could get the answers. So that is why I think as a period of 5 years is what you would require to go back and forth and do this, and to leave aside anything else that you ever wanted to do. She did everything. Your mother did everything. She drove, shopped, cooked, baked, pickled, and dusted. Everything. But when your father did intervene, um, he would confine himself to simple words of wisdom. For instance, you've mentioned that in times of sisterly strife, we were advised to be a gentle Ben. Ben was this bear who starred in a television series, you might remember. If any of you have watched it in USA. Then he would say, don't use harsh language, another popular theme. And he would also talk about the fact that money doesn't grow on trees because a family of 5 lived on a rather precarious government salary. So he would occasionally come out and admonish
He was
you.
like the sort of,
But
it's like if you have a company, my mother was the CEO and he was the chairman. He only came on
right,
board meetings and he sort of, uh, is
well
everything
said.
all right, and, give a few tips here and there. But my mother was definitely the CEO.
She was the CEO, and he came along. And sometimes the board meeting was when he was working in bed, sitting cross-legged, with a pillow on his lap, a stack of files beside him, hunched over his papers, inscribing neat little squiggles, tugging at his beard, muttering to himself. And dinner invitations were normally reserved for fellow economists
Yeah,
visiting
actually,
town. And
yeah.
also, did you miss not going out on holidays with him, or you didn't expect to do that?
I don't remember. It is true that he took us out on one holiday. It was in 1974, and we all went to Nainital. This is sort of gone down in our history books. He never took us again. I don't remember then thinking that, oh, poor us, we are not going out anywhere. I don't remember that. Um, in fact, I feel very sad. I haven't taken my son out much either. Maybe one day he will sort of hold this against me. I think I took him once to Bombay. Now I feel very guilty about it.
I don't think you should ever feel guilty, because if you grew up so well, your son's going to do the same. There's something called the genes factor, so it's all going to percolate. So, was your father able to cut across governments of varying shades and varying, let us say, proclivities, and a large number of finance ministers, because a lot of people have said, because he was a risk averse person? There's one commentator who talked about his dream CV, because he was a professor at 30, CEA at close to 40, Secretary Economic Affairs at 44, India's first member secretary of the Planning Commission, Reserve Bank governor at 50, Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission a little after that, advisor to Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and then, of course, Prime Minister. I'm just wondering, somehow, why did some of these things not get highlighted enough in any PR machinery projections during times of crisis? You were talking about people who were close to him, maybe the media advisor, but what about PR advisors who should have done much more on that count?
Well, my father is very old fashioned. He does not really believe in PR. So I know PR is your field, right?
Exactly.
He feels that you should be what you are and people should look at you, look at your work, and judge for themselves. I mean, I think this is what he believes, that there is no need to create an image. I think you should just present yourself, open yourself to inspection, and let people judge you the way they wish. He doesn't believe in projecting himself. This is his sort of philosophy.
So he wanted his work to do all the talking, especially as an economist.
As in anything,
As in
it's
anything.
his personality. He doesn't believe in selling himself. He doesn't believe in blowing his own trumpet. He doesn't believe in publicizing his virtues. I mean, if people are interested, they will get to know and they will judge him for themselves. But he's not going to be the one to sort of peddle information about himself.
But I think you've managed to do that pretty well through the book, especially because you've talked about some of his far sighted economic policies.